They're not as fragile as the G2 tips.
Welcome, everyone, tonight to our work session here on February 22nd for Bountiful City Council. And we will start with a fiber update from Mr. Gary Hill.
Now, let's stop sharing my pens around. Okay. We wanted to take a few minutes tonight just to update the council on timelines and steps on our fiber process. I think it's been a while since we talked about this outside of the retreat, and there have been a few questions since then, so thought it would be good to answer any of those and kind of let everybody know what to expect next. So I think, as the council all knows, we've contracted with Magellan to do a feasibility study, and the step the Magellan on is right now is a public survey. The survey went out, I want to say, week before last, and it will likely end at the end of this month, beginning of next month. It's intended to be a statistically valid survey, so this isn't a self-prescribed survey where you can sign up and fill out, I should say, self-select survey where you decide if you want to participate or not. They've taken our utility billing database plus the other, email databases that we've had, and then they're going to do a statistically valid sample and try to come up with what essentially the average, statistically speaking, Bountiful residents think about a variety of issues, primarily around price points and services, to get an idea of what would be supported at what level and at what cost. And that's the intent of that survey. There was another point on that I was going to mention. Staff has been working with them on the survey data. We actually ended up making very few changes to the survey that they've been using in other communities. The wind is great, isn't it? There was a question about, is it going to be statistically valid if it's just email addresses? And what we learned when we worked with Y2 Analytics back with Washington Park was that's what they used as well. And they said that, in fact, there are ways using emails that tend to be, for example, much more statistically valid than if it were a phone-only survey. At the end of the day, we were very pleased with Y2 Analytics survey. Their sampling and their survey ended up being very accurate compared to what the ultimate bond results were. And so I'm very comfortable. I think staff's very comfortable with the methodology. And so anyway, the timeline from there at that point would be we'd be looking at having the completed study the end of April, beginning of May.
The completed survey?
Study. So that's everything. So in addition to the survey, they're also looking at costs for the entire system, a variety of other factors that the council will be able to use to help begin your decision-making process. Talking with John Honker at Magellan, he says he made a very conservative estimate of the time that he has seen other communities go through to make these decisions. He said that once the study is complete, a conservative, it could be faster than this, but a conservative estimate is roughly 3 months of conversations with the council and workshops to come to a go, no-go decision. He said that could be faster, but conservatively, he's thinking May through July would be that time frame. Once a decision is made about moving forward, then you're looking at about 6 months of actual engineering, putting the financing together, going through the bonding process, and then following that, it would be the process of either finding a partner. We'd probably be doing that a little bit simultaneously. Either way, You then are getting contractor on board. And so it won't be until the beginning of the next calendar year that we're really looking at beginning construction on fiber, provided a decision is made in the, June, July timeframe. Some of what hampers us there too is that we can't really start in-ground construction in the winter. We have a construction moratorium. So that actually turns out to work, works out pretty well. Turns out it works pretty well for those final planning phases of fiber. Of course, all of that could be expanded if or changed if depending upon the model that the council chooses. At this point in time, there's no determination, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no determination by the city that we're going to put in our own fiber system or that we're going to partner with another entity to do that. All options are still on the table. So his model is assuming that we either create our own fiber network or we partner with another agency to do that where we own the infrastructure. If it turns out after the study and deliberations that the council wants to go with an existing provider, say Utopia or Google, then that would be a different time frame.
So the complete study, along with the survey results, will be April,
End of April, beginning
end
of
of
May.
April, okay. And then that's when we will start our decision-making process.
Yeah.
Based on their recommendations.
And if I remember right, the conversation we had at the retreat was really about making sure that that's the time that we are, the council has all the information, everything that you need necessary to make a decision. And so, we may get the study results. You may want additional information at that point. In fact, I'd imagine it's likely. So that process will be as long or as short as I think the council feels it needs to make a good decision.
That's a good question about the survey. Do you know how many surveys were sent out and what is our kind of goal range? We want to have, for this statistically valid survey, certain number returned
Yeah,
to kind of reach that threshold?
I don't know the number. I can find out and maybe send that out. I apologize.
Okay, that would be good to know.
Question on the survey, Gary. It sounded from your explanation that we are going with an email-only survey, not a combination of phone and email. But I wanted
Correct.
to make sure I understood that right.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. Email only, just like Y2Ks or Y2s was.
I have another question, if anyone. So with the, having the study be completed end of April, beginning of May, what would your anticipated suggestion for a process for the information to be presented to the council? In what formats and would we have multiple work sessions to hear it and then work session for questions, or what are you envisioning, or what are they envisioning too, as the entity reporting back?
So I think it's very fluid, but what I'm envisioning is that there's an initial work session where all of the findings of the survey are presented to the council with opportunity to ask questions, to understand what's been presented. I think that's then going to lead naturally into a series of work sessions where the additional questions that come up we discuss in a work session format. And I only suggest work session because we tend to have more time for that, for those discussions. And I'm sure that there will be opportunities throughout that entire process, since the work sessions precede the regular meeting, that folks that are coming to the work sessions will have an opportunity to address the council if they want to. But I think it will take a couple of work sessions at least to really digest the results of the study, and we'll get that in everybody's hands before the first work session. And once we really understand what the consultant is suggesting, then I think the work begins with what additional information you want and how to go about getting it and things like that. I don't know if that helps, Kate. That's not a great answer, but
No, that helps, just to set the expectation of probably looking at a multiple work session timeline, probably end of May, beginning of June, July-ish.
Yep.
So even though I know that there are some, including myself, that, you know, it's frustrating that it takes so long, what I like about that time frame is that it allows everyone, it includes the public, it allows, rather, the public to be able to see the full report of what we're seeing. It allows us to really fully digest it. And then at that point, if there are any questions from, you know, anyone on the council or members of the public, there's time to address what those questions are and really get to the meat of what our decisions should be. So,
Is the,
Question.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Is the consultant, does the consultant's work conclude once they hand off their final report and present it to us in a work session? Or are they still under contract for those multiple work sessions that might come afterwards for additional expert opinion and feedback?
Yeah, their contract and their intention is to be with us through at least the decision-making process. And then, you know, if we wanted to continue to use them in any capacity, we could. But, yep, they don't just hand it off at the end of the report. Good question.
So is it anticipated then that the completed study will contain like a really robust, in-depth look at both kind of options, the partnering with an existing entity and the city-owned and operated run plan, that they're going to present both of those kind of basic type of options to us in a real in-depth way with, like you said, price point, services, accessibility, all the things that people are concerned about, that we'll get all of that in the study.
So I don't think we're going to get a complete comparison between partnering with somebody and what the cost would be for the city to do it, say, if we were to do our own contractor, in part because whoever we would select as the partner would have a big say in what the ultimate costs would be, where they would be carrying a lot of those costs. And because we haven't selected a partner, we couldn't at that point do a really in-depth comparison. So I think the intention is that what we will find is if we were to start at base level, this is what it would cost for us to put in the fiber on our own. And then we would need to go out and recontact some of those folks that responded to our RFP with the updated data and say, okay, at this point, what would you see a partnership looking like? In reality, there are only one or two that would be based on our prior process that would, I think, be viable partners anyway in that process. I mean, I'd be happy for Lloyd and Richard or anybody that participated in that process in depth to chime in on that. So, but yeah, Magellan can't really evaluate what a partnership would look like because we don't have a partner yet.
But they're not going to be utilizing the information that was presented, I don't know if it was last August or September. I mean, we can look that up, I guess, ourselves, but yeah, okay.
They have access to all that information, yeah. So I don't know the degree to which they're at this point, and I wish Alan West were here. I'm sorry, he'd know better. To which they're going to try and incorporate that data, but we know that we will have to merge those data points together. The other challenge that we're going to have a little bit at the beginning is that those proposals that were made by Strata and Google and Utopia and others are now a year old, and with the big changes that we've seen in pricing and supply chain issues, that we'll have to take a look at that.
Is Magellan meeting with staff now, or they just, they've done all their meetings and gathering information, now they're working on their own aside from this survey?
So we have a conference call with them every 2 weeks where we go over the latest steps, and that involves Lloyd and Clint, myself, Alan Johnson, Alan West.
And would it make sense for them to present or come and have some discussion with us prior to their report being finalized?
Possibly. I can find out if what they think about that. I think the concern might be sharing information out of context. But I'm happy to find out, for example, if it makes sense to share the survey results before the rest of the study is complete. Was there something that you had in mind?
Just if there was some discussion or dialogue that should happen before the report's finalized, like, I don't know if you're meeting with them ongoing, maybe that's not necessary, but I could see some scenarios where maybe they're trying to figure things out and based on our preferences, and if that was helpful to finish the report, to get that on the calendar now so that there's not a delay come April, May.
I think what we should do is we'll talk to them. I'm sure that after the survey is complete and they start to digest those results, that they've already told us that there's going to be a checking in on that point. And I mean, at that point, there may be some policy direction that we need from you all. So we'll find out. I think that's a good idea.
Would it be, it just seems like it might be useful or productive to contact the fiber providers who were the most viable at the last RFP. Is that what it was that was sent out, right? And ask them, let them know that this is where we are in the process, and that, because for me, I think it will be hard to compare and look at the plans or the different options unless we really know what those or existing providers like Google, Utopia, et cetera, are, where they stand at this time. And I think that if we wait until May and then go to them and say, oh, now we want to get this information so we can compare, then we're just kicking it down the road a wee bit further. And this could hasten if we were able to reach out to them now and say, we're moving along, we anticipate getting our study, and
I agree with that. As much as we can double up on our timetables and bring all that information in April and May would help us make that decision on how to move forward. Because say that report comes in May, and then we decide we want to ask them for an RFP, and then that doesn't come in until July, we're missing critical time.
Do you think that likely providers are already aware of this time frame that we're likely providers know that we are, in this position, ready to make a decision soon?
Yeah, I don't know that they've been following us that closely, so it's probably unlikely that they know.
it seems like much of their work has already been done. They already know the infrastructure of the city, they already know what the needs would be, and they could just update their pricing structure and their, I don't know if they would need to update also their timelines.
Can I jump in? So probably timelines are the key thing on that. If we're talking about Google or Utopia who come in with a prepackaged product, I mean, Google's price is going to be the same for all of us to have fiber next year as it is right now, more than likely. I mean, they're not going to come in and present updated costs because they own the system. They have hundreds of thousands of customers that are already on that price point, and that's how we would be if they installed for us. And with Utopia, it's the same thing. There could be an issue that needs to be ironed out about bonding, city guarantee, and that sort of thing, but they come in with a prepackaged product as well. And they don't need any lead time, or they don't need to follow our process to know what their process is going to be, should we say, hey, Utopia, let's do this. So it would be nice that they know we're coming along in case it puts us in line, but it's not going to change any of the financials to do with Utopia or with Google Fiber. If the city decided to do a network of the city owns, some of those facilitators would probably have price changes. Although I don't think we got firm prices from anybody, we just got rough estimates.
Yeah, Strata came the closest to giving us a price estimate, and it was, I mean, it was probably within, what, if I remember right, a $10 million, $8 to $10 million swing. So that would probably, and I was thinking the same thing, that with a partner like Strata or facilitator, they would probably have a price change. And I don't think there's any reason we couldn't reach out to them and at least tell them, hey, this is where we're at in the process, this is what we're thinking. You know, we haven't made any kind of decision yet. We would really like you to continue to keep us in mind and maybe give us some updated pricing.
So for the two, big players in fiber nationwide, or Utah-wide, I should say, prices aren't going to change for us necessarily. But for those facilitating companies, it could.
And that cost is not a cost to the city, it's just would be a cost to those that participate in fiber?
Yeah, for Google, $0 from the city. With Utopia, Gary, I'm sure you understand Utopia's system better than I do. But with Utopia, they bond for the money based on the income revenue that's going to come from the users. It doesn't go to the rest of the taxpayers. So, and the city guarantees that money, if I know correctly.
That's right.
So part of your concern is pricing, but another part of your concern is getting in the queue, right?
Well,
Or
yeah,
like seeing
timelines
seeing
and-
if there would be room for us in the queue. But, I mean, it's tricky since we don't know who, but just checking with them to see. So does that seem reasonable, Gary?
Yeah, I think those are great comments, and I think it's smart to try and get ahead of the game as much as we can. So, yeah, we'll make sure and reach out and see what we can get so that we get as much information together at the same time.
Great.
So we have a winter construction moratorium in our streets, but we don't have any sort of moratorium for horizontal boring, those kinds of things, is that right? Or do we?
We typically include that in the moratorium
Okay.
where it's in the street right of way. But we try and be flexible and reasonable with that. If we have good weather, then, and what they're proposing isn't too invasive, then sometimes we let those move ahead.
Cool. It's getting the cart before the horse a little bit, but as has been expressed, it would sure be nice to get this rolling. And if we can stage this project so that street work is done during those construction summer months and boring is done to catch up on the connections after the fact, it would be nice to, once we choose an installer, to get it installed as expeditiously as possible and get people connected. I think we can work some tricks, especially with Lloyd's expertise. Try to shorten those seasons, or lengthen those seasons, shorten the install period.
Would
Yeah,
be
we do have
nice.
that advantage of being the owner of the infrastructure, so.
Yeah.
Great. And of course, like everything that we do here, we welcome resident feedback at any point. We'd love emails or phone calls or any method of communication from residents on this. So any other questions about fiber? Thank you. So we will move to the next item, legislative update. For
Thank
Gary
you.
Hill, thanks.
Good, we've got about a half an hour. I'd like to start by sharing some data, and many of you may have seen this. The Hinckley Institute provides construction data Let's see. Should be showing more than my desktop. Hold tight. Crossing my fingers this works.
Gary, do you have it set up on like a 2-monitor system right now? No? Okay.
No. Not that I'm aware of. I only have one monitor, so I wonder what I'm doing wrong. I don't know. I'll talk. I'll see if Lloyd can figure out my laptop while I talk. Maybe we'll come back to that item. But I wanted to circle back around about the narrative that cities are not doing their part to provide affordable housing. You know, one of the really challenging aspects of this conversation is that cities don't build housing. We facilitate it, we respond to it. We aren't the contractors. We don't buy and sell land. We just have to sort of respond to what the market says, and we have been painted the last few years by the housing and development community, members of the legislature as an impediment to housing in the state, cities generally. And there's some very persuasive data that shows that we have built more, the state has built more multifamily housing in the last couple of years than we have ever seen. Thanks, I don't know what you did, but it's magic. This is a construction database that the Hinckley Institute of Policy, the Kem Gardner Institute of Policy, provides. Some of you have seen this, but I want to point out a couple of sets of data here. These are the cumulative residential units that have been permitted over the course of the year, with this red line being the most recent year, 2021. And you can see that the number of units far outstrips what we've ever done in the past. Last year, 2020 was an all-time high at 2.6 million units statewide. We've added another 3.1 million units, as I understand it. And here's the really interesting part. If you look over at these tables, and I apologize, I don't know why that is so light on the screen, so I'll kind of walk you through it. This bottom section are the number of single-family detached homes for which building permits were provided, 17,528. This next section is condominiums and townhomes, and then the top unit is apartment units. Compare the number of apartment units that were approved in cities in 2021 at 14,000 to 2017, which was only 5,000. It's a staggering amount of additional units that have been permitted, and an all-time high the last couple of years of multifamily units, which is really the exact opposite of the narrative that has been shared at the state about what cities are not permitting. And that's one of the things that's frustrating about this conversation, is that we're being painted as obstructionist as cities, when in reality we've never permitted more of all types of housing, but particularly multifamily housing, which is the segment that many people point out as being the most affordable. What's really interesting to me about this is this does not include any entitled units. So this is just units that were approved for which building permits were issued. Saratoga Springs, for example, all by itself has about 20,000 units that have been entitled. Approvals have been made, the subdivisions are ready to go. It's just the construction industry isn't building the units yet. In Bountiful ourselves, I had Lloyd and Francisco pull some data for us that I thought you might find interesting. We have currently 614 units that have been entitled, multifamily units that have been entitled, and another 100 available single-family lots for a total of over 700 lots just in Bountiful that could be built today if the construction industry built them. So I think the Hinckley Institute or I can't remember who did the study a couple of years ago that identified the housing gap in Utah of being about 40,000 units. If you included the units that are actually entitled that could be built if the construction industry, the housing and development community caught up, we would quickly outstrip the housing shortage in the state. But unfortunately, this is being painted as we have this housing gap and it's all the city's fault. In fact, last week, I think we heard this Senate president on a radio station was asked by, got this word from our city attorney on his way home. The Senate president was on a radio station and was asked by the host, why can't we figure out this affordable housing issue? And his answer was, well, it's really cities. We don't want to tell them what to do, but if they won't come along, then we might just have to. So it's a really challenging thing to try and fight. And so much of our time at the Capitol this year has been spent on affordable housing issues, housing and land use issues, that we just keep constantly pushing back on that narrative. Items I've missed or questions about this data set?
Do they further disaggregate this out by county, like how many units per county?
They do, and I can send a link of this study to you, but you can see, for example, they give the top 5 counties, and you can see where residential units, Utah County in the last year gave building permits for 12,000 units, then Salt Lake County was 11,000, Davis County was 3rd, then Washington County, and finally Weber County. So there's a lot more data to dig in here as well. If there aren't any more questions or observations about this, I can maybe move into some of the legislation.
How would you recommend we get the real story to the Senate President, and Majority Leader, and Speaker of the House?
Well, this has been shared with all the leadership. I think the short answer is residents have to tell them. If their constituents aren't telling them, they have a tendency not to listen. So I think it's making this information public and having residents explain to their elected representatives, what the data means.
I think unfortunately that's often viewed as like NIMBY arguments, like,
Yeah.
oh, we have enough multifamily, even if it's true, like a city or a county or an area has increased their permits or, multifamily dwellings, apartments, et cetera. I think often that is viewed as a NIMBY argument, like, oh, we just don't want any more of that here. It's a good idea, kind of like the article.
Yep, exactly.
That article that was in KSL, I think, was
Yeah.
really enlightening. And an observation that I made to myself on that is there is a difference between what residents are saying. So I think it was one of the developers that quoted talked about it. It's constantly a fight when you go into a public hearing and you're seeking more density, and you hear all of the NIMBY arguments about I don't want it here, it should go someplace else. And that's true. I think we all hear that, but I think there's a big difference between what the public is saying and what local elected officials are actually doing. This data suggests that city officials are listening to both sides, but are still approving those units. And I think that for convenience sake, some of the development industry wants to point at the noise and not the actual actions that are being taken by responsible local elected leaders.
Can I make a suggestion that I think the 614 multifamily entitled units and the 100 single-family entitled units, those are numbers we ought to share with our 3 state legislators. I think that's an audience that is interested in our data and our feedback, and finds us to be a credible source. And I think that data point is impactful without getting into the discussions about NIMBYism. To just know that there are that many sitting entitled in just our city, let alone the others that they cover in their districts in the rest of South Davis.
Well, when you compare that number with what we talked about at our last meeting, which was on average, we have about 30 new units permitted a year. But when you realize that we have, a lot more than that that could be permitted if people would simply, if they wanted to, if the market wanted to, it's kind of startling. I think it does show you that the city's not just sitting back and stopping people from developing. That's just not the correct information. So,
Another thing that might be interesting, if it's not too difficult for the staff to compile, is how long these have been entitled and available. How long have they been sitting ready? Because I think that's the other part of the equation that maybe legislators don't understand. And there might be very good reasons why a developer might not be able to move forward. It might right now be supply chain issues or workforce labor issues. But I think knowing the total that are available and then how long they've been sitting available to move forward on would be interesting data points for them to have examples of.
Maybe I could just make a comment about that. I would characterize the single-family home lots, that 100-unit number, those have been around a long time for the most part. The caveat to that is that they are some of the most difficult lots in town. These are not going to be just an off-the-shelf plan that you can use and go build your dream home. These are going to be custom homes. They have a lot of issues to deal with. That being said, I think it would be easy to characterize the other units as being more recent. You know, the bulk of those probably come from Renaissance Town Center.
Oh, yeah.
about 480 of those units are Renaissance Town Center. And I'm just looking quickly at the list, and I would say that they've probably mostly been approved within the last 2 years, all of them. Maybe all of them on that list.
Multifamily?
Multifamily.
Or they're very close to being, these are ones that we felt like were close enough to be counted. You know, there's a few out there on the horizon still, but these are ones that are right on our doorstep.
So it would be fair to say that when we did the redo of the overlay for Renaissance 2 years ago, that's the point at which those 480 became entitled?
Well, actually,
Maybe not entitled.
no, they actually became entitled before that. When the zoning was approved for that property, that's when they became entitled.
You mean like
So-
way back in 2000?
They could have, yes, with the densities back then. I think we have changed the zoning slightly, but really back in 2000, there was a certain amount of density that they were entitled to back then, which was a large number then, too.
Yeah,
In fact, I think we've reduced the density on that site, if I remember right.
I personally think that would be very impactful to our three legislators to know that, you know, that there were this many multifamily lots available in a particular part of town, and they didn't move forward because the developer chose not to move forward, not because there was hurdles or barriers placed because of the city. So I, for one, would be very interested of what timelines you could break the 614 down to.
Okay.
I just have to say that I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back up here, but I think that we have struck a pretty good balance between the desires of developers coming in and the desires of residents to keep their neighborhoods the way they are. I mean, the fact that we're locating these multifamily areas on transit lines and that sort of thing in specific areas where it makes strategic sense, that's a big deal to be able to have that kind of control. And to think of the legislature stepping in and painting Bountiful with a single brush. Might be pleasant for developers, but it wouldn't be pleasant for residents of our neighborhoods. So I like the balance that we've struck, and I know we've been cooperative, so.
On that note, there are at least 3 land use and housing bills out there right now that we're all keeping a close eye on. There is a large feeling in the West that legislatures need to step in and provide entitled, or it's not the right word, housing by right or development by right. Just, I think, a week and a half ago, there was a bill introduced in the Arizona legislature, supported by the governor's office and leadership in both their houses, that mandated multifamily developments in every zone of every city, up to 8 units per acre. No height restrictions, no other restrictions. So if you can imagine a cul-de-sac in Bountiful with you could combine into an acre, and suddenly you have a 2 or 3 story building there. That's what's been, or is likely to be allowed in Arizona. It was one way to address these issues. I think there were a couple of issues early on in the session where the state had a desire to get much more involved. I think the League of Cities and Towns has done a fantastic job of helping educate some of those legislators about the problems associated with that. One of those bills that we're going to see that's not yet numbered but has been negotiated over the last several weeks is something related to what they call station area plans. So this would require a city that has a fixed guideway, like a rail line with stations, so front runner or tracks, or a bus rapid transit stop, to approve a station, an area, a plan within a half mile of that station. It does not dictate the type of housing that has to go there or densities. That was an idea to begin with. It does put forth in state code some principles that we should adhere to, but it leaves all of the local land use decision making to the cities. With the idea being that transit air corridors are an important area for higher densities as well as retail and those types of uses. We feel like this is a pretty good compromise. When our bus rapid transit line is approved, we'll have to put in these, a station area plan. There's a quick turnaround on those. I know that cities that have a lot of them, I think I heard Salt Lake has over 40 stations. If you consider this would be a requirement to update both the general plan and your zoning code. So if you can imagine doing that 50 times, a different one for each plan, that's a lot of work. We won't have anywhere near that many, but this is a requirement that will be put on us. But we will get credit, and that's the intent of the legislation, if it goes through the way it should. We will get credit for planning that's been done beforehand. And as I look at, at least our station at Renaissance, that's a great example of we've been planning around that transit line ever since the BRT was first brought up, and so we will get. I think there's some good planning going on there. So look for the station area and plan legislation. There's what is being affectionately called Senate Bill 34 Plus. A couple of years ago at the legislature, Senate Bill 34 was an effort by cities to, rather than get hammered for not looking proactively enough at providing affordable housing, it was a menu option that was put into state code that cities have to comply with, and we have to do a report every year on how we're accomplishing our moderate income housing plan. And I think a city like ours has to currently choose 3. Cities with transit have to choose 5 of these actions to take, and then we submit those reports. You may remember that when we submitted our report this year, Francisco came before you, and the data was exactly the same as the prior year report because of the the bad data collection that's going on. And so part of this SB 34 plus bill would be to begin collecting good data, which we're all in favor of, and housing it all in a central location. It will create a burden for planning staffs all over the state because we're going to have to start collecting data that we may not be doing now. But I think it will give hopefully a more accurate look on what's actually happening. I was heartened by a conversation about this with the governor's staff a week ago, where a plea was made by a member of the governor's staff who was the mayor in St. George, John Pike, that the governor's office be data-driven, not anecdote-driven, which I was really pleased to hear. And this will help us be data-driven and not anecdote-driven when it comes to land use and housing. Again, that bill hasn't been drafted yet either, and it's still coming. A bill that popped up this week, late in the process, that has been numbered and is out is House Bill 416, Property Rights Ombudsman Amendments. The Office of the Property Rights Ombudsman was created several years ago to be sort of a mediator between land use authorities and the community, and if somebody disagreed with the land use decision, they could take this to the State Property Rights Ombudsman's office, who would provide an opinion as to whether or not the city correctly applied its zoning ordinances. It's generally been pretty effective at resolving issues. It was intended to address complaints by the development community that cities weren't responsive and that going through the court process took too long. Clint's actually on the board, I believe, of that organization, and but this bill would turn that office into an office that would review every city's land use ordinances every year and land use decisions against their ordinances every year to see that they were in compliance. And if they weren't, that we would lose state funding or could be sued by parties. It completely turns the purpose of the Property Rights Ombudsman's Office on its ear. And this has been promoted by the Home Builders Association, very much against the process that we've tried to have between the league and the development community over the years to work things out in the interim session. It was thrown in very late in the session, and I think the league's opinion on this is simply that there's no good in this bill. We aren't going to negotiate. We're simply going to fight it. It's very frustrating. It's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do up there. And then finally, House Bill 151, which is the retail incentives bill, which has been discussed ad nauseum for over a year in many, many different formats and task forces, is coming along. It too has not yet been drafted. I should say it's been drafted, but hasn't been made public yet. Still working out some items, but I think that generally speaking, Bountiful's pretty comfortable with where it's at. I don't think it will hinder any of the way we do use our redevelopment funds. It will add maybe some reporting burdens on us in the event that we use RDA funds to help put in infrastructure. We might have to provide some reports on that, but we historically have never given retail incentives other than putting it in for public infrastructure to help buy down the cost of development, similar to what we're doing in Renaissance Town Center by helping build that parking structure that will be public parking. So I think the practices of Bountiful over the years have made it so that this bill isn't terribly impactful to us. It will be more painful for high-growth cities than it will be for Bountiful. Any questions on the land use and housing front or items that I may have missed, Mayor or Kate or Richard?
I was just going to say, retail incentives is in committee tomorrow afternoon, so one hopes that the sub that has in theory been agreed to will be prepared and ready for review by 4 o'clock.
We'll see, huh? Chances are it'll be ready for discussion and be voted out of committee regardless of what shape it's in. They'll fix the problems later. Not that that happens.
They're running out of runway to introduce a sub, so if it's not in the Senate committee hearing, it'll have to be on the Senate floor.
Yep.
Either way, it has to go back for concurrence now on the House side.
Well, thank you for that update, and thank you to you, Gary, and Kate, and Richard, everyone who's involved. It's amazing to me the changes that have been made to some legislation by the league and others that really help make things not impact us quite as negatively as they otherwise would. So it's really appreciated, and I had no idea the impact that the things going on in the legislature on our city. I mean, it's really amazing to me, but thank you. Any other questions for Kate or Gary?
I have one. I need an update on the zipper technique, if Kate would be willing to share that with us.
So the zipper bill is flying through the legislative process. I expect that you're going to need to become well-versed in how to properly merge so that you're aware of when to apply the zipper method. And I believe the state crustacean bill is also moving forward as a favorite. I believe it actually had a committee hearing this afternoon. So fans of the brine shrimp as the state crustacean should rejoice. I think it's, because I spend all the time for my day job up at the state capitol, I get to see the league staff up close and work with them on a lot of different bills. I hope for Mayor Harris and Councilman Higginson, it's been informative to be on the LPC committee this year. I know Gary has seen this in years past. There are so many bills that go through that the league works on. I think Cameron Dill and I are going to compare at the end of the session how many negotiating meetings we were in on different issues with leadership on some of those hot button issues, because we would pass each other going in and out of negotiations. And we are lucky to have the league staff as our advocacy arm, especially as a city that doesn't spend resources to have our own lobbyists. And so we really depend on the league staff. And then there are several cities that make staffers, available to help the league. Gary fills, one of those spots at different times, Clint and others. But it takes quite an effort to get your arms around all of the nuances to these issues, from whether you're a small town in a rural setting to an established city like Bountiful or a city of the first class. So when you see one of our League of Cities and Towns staff people, maybe don't bug them on March 5th or March 6th, but like the 7th or 8th, let them know that they've done a wonderful job.
Mayor, could I make one more comment?
Sure.
I wish that residents could know the heavy lifting that you and Kate and Gary are doing down at the Capitol. That there's so much benefit to Bountiful to having folks down there who are so active and who are so well respected and who are in positions of leadership in the League of Cities and Towns. And I just wish our residents all knew that. So thanks to the three of you who are doing the heavy lifting down there. And I've enjoyed having a salad every week that I come and visit you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Kate and Gary. All right, well, we will adjourn just for a few minutes here until our regular meeting. So.
Give an IP.